10 creepy, bizarre and unsolved mysteries. Mysteries stir our curiosity, mesmerizing us until they can be solved. Though supernatural causes or conspiracy theories are more fun to think about, mysteries often end up with surprisingly banal explanations. However, there are cases which remain unsolved, perhaps forever, and they are often the most intriguing. 10. The murder of Julia Wallace. Julia Wallace was a British housewife who lived at 29 Wolverton Street in Liverpool. On January 19, 1931, her husband William went to the local chess club for a regular game. When he arrived, he was told a message was left for him by a man named Qualtraugh, a name William didn't recognize, telling him to go to 25 Minlove Gardens East. The next day, William did just that, leaving his wife at home. He ultimately discovered it was a phony address, having spent nearly an hour wandering up and down the road. Despaired, William went home, where he was shocked to discover his wife's bloody, beaten corpse lying in their parlor. Police arrested William about 2 weeks later, convinced he had left himself a phony message, as the call came from a box only a few hundred yards from his chess club. Even though most of the evidence against him was circumstantial, William was convicted and sentenced to death. William's case was brought up to the Court of Criminal Appeal, which rarely overturned jury decisions. However, the court decided this case warranted it, and William was set free. To this day, no other person has been charged with the crime, and it remains unsolved. 9. The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui. Known in Scotland as Amphirliath Moor, the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui is a cryptid, similar to the Yeti or Bigfoot. He is said to be found on Ben Macdui, the largest peak in the Cairngorm Mountains, and it first became more than a local legend in 1889, when Professor Norman Colley allegedly saw it. Though he technically didn't see the Grey Man, he was quoted as saying, "I heard something else other than my own footsteps. For every few steps I took I heard a crunch and then another crunch as if someone was walking after me but taking footsteps 3 or 4 times the length of my own." Various other accounts have come from a number of people since then, including Peter Dingham, a member of the airplane rescue team for Ben Macdui. Naturalist and mountaineer Alexander Union also claimed to have seen the Grey Man, firing 3 shots from his pistol at a figure which charged at him through the mist. A Brocken spectre, a phenomenon where an observer's shadow is cast upon the surfaces of clouds opposite the sun, has been claimed to be the cause of these so-called sightings, although that doesn't explain the sound of an extra pair of footsteps. 8. The Hessdalen lights. Sightings of this particular phenomenon go back as far as 1811 and occur in the Hessdalen Valley, which is in the middle of Norway. However, in the early 1980s, the lights became much more frequent, with a peak of nearly 20 separate reports each week. Since then, the sightings have decreased in frequency, with observations numbering 10 to 20 per year. Normally, the lights are either bright white or yellow and hover above the ground. Various scientific studies have been commissioned to find out the source behind the lights, but no conclusive explanation has been found. There are cameras stationed around the valley, set up to take pictures of any bright light. Studies meant to refute some of the findings have pointed out a variety of logical explanations, including car headlights and mirages, though they admit that such things don't necessarily explain every occurrence. 7. The Great Amherst Mystery. In the latter half of the 19th century, in a little town called Amherst in Nova Scotia, a woman named Esther Cox was beset by what she claimed were poltergeists. Esther lived in a house with her sister and her family. After Esther had been nearly killed by a male friend of hers, who may have suffered a psychotic break, her house began to be haunted. After spending some time at another sister's house in a nearby province because of her failing health, Esther returned to Amherst, whereupon the hauntings began again. After the poltergeists threatened to burn down the house, Esther moved in with another family, whose house became haunted as well. Part-time actor Walter Hubble moved in with Esther, as he was also an occasional paranormal investigator. He investigated the house for a number of weeks, eventually writing a popular book about his experiences, in which he claimed to have seen floating objects as well as attacks on Esther by unseen forces. To date, no explanation has been given, though some who've investigated the stories believe it was all a hoax by Esther. 6. The disappearance of Benjamin Bathurst. Benjamin Bathurst was a 19th century diplomat for Britain, relatively young and extremely proficient in his job, a man with seemingly limitless potential. In 1809, after conducting a diplomatic mission to Austria, he headed home, forced to take a more perilous route to avoid the French. He had been trying to convince the Austrians to attack Napoleon's forces, armed to the teeth, including 2 pistols he always kept on his person. Bathurst decided to travel through Germany, under the assumed name of Koch. On November 25, Bathurst and his German aide, Herr Cross, stopped at the small town of Perleberg, resting a while before continuing their journey. When the time had come to leave the inn at which they had stopped, Bathurst walked out the door, with Cross allegedly following afterward, only seconds behind. However, when Cross got outside, Bathurst was gone, never to be seen again. Cross himself eventually made it to England, weeks later, and told British officials of Bathurst's disappearance. A rather large investigation was undertaken, with Bathurst's wife herself spending a lot of money to have dogs scour the area surrounding Perleberg, but Bathurst was never found. Various articles of his clothing were discovered in the nearby area, but his body remained lost. The prevailing opinion is that he was either arrested by the French and later killed in prison, or was simply another victim of the bandits who made traveling through Europe during the 19th century a risky proposition. 5. The Lost Sublett Mine. The Guadalupe Mountains, located in West Texas and southeastern New Mexico, are said to be home to some of the richest gold mines in the world, a fact alleged by the famous Apache Geronimo. Ben Sublett, an old miner who lived during the 19th century, was supposed to have found a vein of gold, one so valuable he could mine $10,000 worth of gold in a week. Unfortunately, the only evidence of his mine is a single hole in the ground, which is not much bigger than a man. Long seen as a drunk and a liar, Sublett came into his local tavern one night, throwing down a handful of nuggets and proclaiming drinks were on him. A number of unsuccessful efforts were made to pry the secret from him, and attempts were made to follow him to his secret mine, but they were met with the business end of his rifle. Even when Sublett's young son asked where the gold was located, Sublett told him to find it himself, like his father did. To this day, no one knows where the mine is located, and scientists don't believe large gold veins are even located in the Guadalupe Mountains. 4. The Aurora Incident. In 1897, a very strange incident occurred in the tiny North Texas town of Aurora, on Saturday, April 17, 1897 at 6 o'clock in the morning. A cigar-shaped UFO, metallic silver in color, appeared suddenly in the sky above Aurora. It was moving from south to north. Unlike the balloon airships of its time, this UFO was built of an unknown metal, resembling somewhat a mix of aluminum and silver. A witness guessed that the ship weighed several tons. The sighting occurred during a time when many strange airships were being seen all over the United States. For this reason, the UFO was called an airship in a newspaper article written later by Aurora resident Hessdalen. Hayden told the Dallas Morning News that the strange craft seemed to be having some kind of mechanical problems. It slowed down to about 10 or 12 miles per hour and began settling toward the ground. Hayden said the townspeople watched in amazement as the slow-moving airship drifted over the town square and then moved north toward the property of Judge J.S. Proctor. Next, the UFO collided with a windmill on the judge's land and went into pieces with a terrific explosion, scattering debris over several acres of ground. The crash destroyed the windmill, the adjacent water tank and the judge's flower garden. It seems likely that the explosion and crash drew many spectators to Judge Proctor's land. Among the wreckage, the townspeople found the dead body of the ship's pilot. Then the story got really weird. Witnesses said that the pilot was not a human being. Hayden said that, although the pilot's body was damaged severely in the crash, it was clear that he was not an inhabitant of this world. The pilot may have been from Mars, said another witness, Mr. T.J. Weems, an officer in the U.S. Signal Service and an authority on astronomy. In the case of the UFO that exploded in 1891 over Dublin, Texas, papers were found containing strange writing on them. The same thing happened in Aurora. When the townspeople checked the pilot's body, they found that he was carrying papers written in an unknown language. The papers may have contained a record of the pilot's journeys, but they were written in some unknown hieroglyphics and could not be understood. As word of what happened reached surrounding towns, Many visitors arrived to look at the crash site. Hayden commented, "The town is full of people today who are viewing the wreck and gathering specimens of the strange metal from the debris. It's possible that some of that mysterious wreckage that was carried away from Aurora still exists today, stored away and forgotten in attics or storage rooms. No trace of it has ever been found, though." After the crash, the townspeople tried to find out more about how the UFO was constructed and what made it fly. However, Hayden said that the ship was too badly wrecked to form any conclusion as to its construction or motive power. The Dallas Morning News article, published 2 days after the crash, said that the pilot's funeral would take place on April 18. Another newspaper, the Fort Worth Register, said, "The pilot, who was not an inhabitant of this world, was given proper Christian burial at the Aurora Cemetery. When the pilot was buried, a marker was placed on his grave." In 1973, newspaper reporter Bill Case described the marker as having a strange design on it resembling a flying saucer with portholes. Shortly after Case wrote a story describing the grave marker, somebody stole it. Today, nobody is sure exactly where the pilot was buried. In 2008, an unmarked grave dating back to the 1890s was found at the Aurora Cemetery during the filming of a television show called UFO Hunters for the History Channel. Since the owners of the cemetery will not allow anyone to dig up the grave, nobody knows if it is the grave of the strange pilot. Although some people claim the story is not true and was created by Aurora residents to boost tourism, many other people do believe that a spaceship crash landed there. The case of the alien that fell from the sky in Aurora, Texas, continues to fascinate people to this very day. It still remains as much of a mystery today as it was back in 1897. 3. The Black Mausoleum. In the 17th century, Scotland was going through an intense religious struggle, started by King Charles introducing the Common Book of Prayer and declaring all opposition to the book an act of treason, and the draconian lawyer George Mackenzie was the man responsible for putting the opposition down. George Mackenzie was a lawyer and the Lord Advocate during the rule of Charles II and quickly earned a reputation as one of the most vicious persecutors of the Covenanters, the people who rose up and signed the National Covenant in 1638. Around Mackenzie's brutal and unfeeling treatment of the protesters even earned him the moniker Bloody Mackenzie. Many Covenanters were imprisoned in a section of Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, where he delighted in their torture. Guards were allowed to beat the Covenanters at will, and eventually their heads would decorate the spiked gate. After his death, Mackenzie was entombed in a mausoleum in the Greyfriars Kirkyard, which has been the site of a number of desecrations. In 1999, a homeless man sought shelter in Mackenzie's mausoleum and fell through the floor. The hole can still be seen. After the disruption in the mausoleum, people have reported poltergeist activity around the tomb, including scratches and bruises, all attributed to Mackenzie's poltergeist, as horrific in death as he was in life. However, this did not scare a duo of teens who broke into the tomb in 2004, and removed a number of unidentified remains, even beheading one corpse and using the skull like a hand puppet. They were found and tried under centuries-old grave robbing law described as violation of sepulchre. Thanks to the many violations, the doors to the mausoleum remain locked, but visitors can still peek through and recite the old children's rhyme. Bluity Makini, come o it if ye door, lift the snack and draw the bar. 2. The Hornet spooklight. With sightings dating back as far as 1866, the Hornet spooklight, also known by a number of different names, has made its home in a place known as the Devil's Promenade in northeast Oklahoma. Normally said to be an orange ball of light which bobs along a 6.4 kilometer, 4 miles, stretch of gravel road, legend says that it was first seen by Native Americans who walked the Trail of Tears. Nobody has ever suffered adverse effects from the light. It simply appears in the sky, wanders aimlessly, bobbing and weaving at great speed, and then it's gone. The most popular explanation is that the Hornet spooklight is a will-o'-the-wisp, the name for the light given off when wood and other organic compounds decay, although the light given by that phenomenon isn't normally as bright. Another leading reason is rather simple. Scientists say that it may simply be the refracted headlights of nearby drivers. However, this doesn't explain the sightings before the invention of the automobile. 1. The murder of Geli Raubal. Angela Geli Raubal was a young woman who grew up in Germany in the early 20th century. Her life was cut short when she allegedly committed suicide on September 18, 1931. The gun she used belonged to her half-uncle, and rumored lover, Adolf Hitler. Known as Uncle Alfie to his niece, Hitler entranced the young woman with his celebrity, since they first became involved just as the Nazis were rising to power. Raubal traveled with the Führer all over the countryside, eventually moving into Hitler's mansion in Munich as a housekeeper. During their time together, Hitler exalted his niece as a paragon for all Aryan women, though some didn't see her that way. One rival called her an empty-headed little slut who manipulated Hitler. Reports of the pair fighting the night before her death were said to have centered on Raubal's wish to travel to Vienna to get engaged to another man. After her suicide, Hitler's people put forth the explanation that Raubal had shot herself because she was nervous about an upcoming music recital, which was widely discredited. No note was ever discovered, and there were reportedly numerous injuries found on Raubal's body, including a broken nose. A firestorm of controversy erupted but was quickly silenced by the Nazis' political influence as well as their threats of litigation. Nevertheless, rumors dogged Hitler for years that he had in fact murdered Raubal. A journalist who was investigating the circumstances surrounding her suicide was arrested by the Nazis just before he was to publish his findings. He was executed months later at Dachau. With that last death, any investigations into the truth of the matter were abandoned, and we may never know what truly happened to Geli Raubal.